Mama of 8 writes, when I first started scrapping in 1996, the only supplies available were 8.5 by 11 papers. Now I look back at the pages from my son's early years, and they are nice but simple. I really think I might need to rework those layouts and redo them as 12 by 12s. My techniques are so much better now, and the supplies available are much better too. What do you think about reworking old pages? Should I just leave them alone, or redo them? Glitter Girl, can you help Mama of 8 remaster Marvelous Memories?
Of course I can. Now, it's worth noting that this is a little bit of a controversial subject. There are many scrapbookers who really firmly believe that there's no reason to ever go back and redo or rework older pages because the pages that we made at the beginning of our scrapbooking hobby certainly will be different than what we're making now, probably. And then by looking at the older pages compared to the newer pages, and as your style continues to develop over the years, you'll have this sort of memory keeping that keeps not only your actual life memories, but also your evolution as a scrapbooker, as an artist, as a creative individual. However, there are others who go back and look at those old pages and think, actually, no, I wish that I could scrapbook those photos knowing what I know now. And so I think it's just a personal decision. There's certainly no right or wrong. Don't feel that you have to go back and redo old pages. And please know that I have hundreds of pages in that old category, and there's no way that I could ever go back and be motivated to scrapbook all of them over again. But there are some that have stories that I would like to tell in a different way that I wish I could just have a bit of a do-over. So today I'm going to show you 2 ways to do that, and I'm going to be using 2 layouts from the archives. One is a little more interesting than the other. So this one is the least interesting of the 2. So this is a double page spread from my time doing 8.5 by 11 pages. And when I started, I scrapbooked 8.5 by 11 for several years before I moved to 12 by 12. And the papers are very, very simple. This was kind of, even at this point, even though it was early on, there's some paper tearing, which at the time, I know this seems ridiculous if you didn't scrapbook back then, but at the time, paper tearing was the edge of innovation. And I also used some lettering templates to do the title. So there are some things that were certainly techniques that were popular at the time, but I'm just starting to get into any pattern paper on my layouts. And the patterns that I did use at the time were almost always single-colored, very subtle patterns. So this blue with a white fleck and then the matching plaid. And you'll notice that there's hardly any of that plaid on show. It's like I had to use a pattern as an accent and not something that I was happy to fill the page. 3 4x6 photos, then 1 smaller photo cropped down to quite a small size. I don't have the negatives for these, so these are my only prints. And this one, there's nothing particularly offensive about this. There's nothing that's cut into an odd shape that I don't like. There's no embellishment that's really over the top or just makes me unsettled. But it's not the way that I would tell the story now, and there are kind of some different stories around these photos that I would enjoy having in my album, so that made it a candidate for a little bit of a reworking. Then there's the interesting one, if you're ready for this. Right, so this is kind of what my pages look like when I very first started scrapbooking. I would say this was within the first 2-3 months that I was scrapbooking. I had one of those notebooks full of different pattern papers. They would be perforated at the edge, and then you had your 8.5 by 11 pattern paper. I had not discovered letter stickers yet or templates, so all my titles were handwritten with markers. And in fact, I think this particular title was still when I was using Crayola markers in my layouts, because I hadn't bought special scrapbooking markers at that point. And then I have 3 photos that are not particularly amazing in any way, but they do tell a rather interesting story, and I don't have the negatives once again, so this is all I have to tell this story. And these are from where I lived my first year at university. So I have a picture of moving into the dorm, a picture of our resident advisor, the older student on our hallway who's kind of there to make sure nothing goes wrong. And then a picture later on in the year of a bunch of us hanging out in one room watching a movie that just kind of captures a little bit of what dorm life was like. Now, this was 1996, 1997. So I didn't take digital pictures, of course, and in fact I didn't take many photographs at all because this was just kind of predating the time when we took lots and lots of photographs. And as a student, because it cost so much money to print photos, I would take hardly any because I would have to have that expense of processing the film and getting the prints developed. So even though these pictures are not particularly amazing, they're very dear to me because this is pretty much the only evidence I have of this sort of existence. So I'm going to go ahead and remake this page so that I can tell the story. All I've done in the journaling is name the places, so the actual dorm that we lived in and my room number, and the names of the people. There's no storytelling beyond that here, and I really would like to capture a little bit more of my memories about what life was like in this dorm before that all fades from my memory. So I'm going to do this one second because I think this one needs a little bit more of a full page treatment. So I'm going to set it aside for now, and I'm going to show you the quick version first. And that's to take an 8.5 by 11 and just make it fit your 12 by 12 albums. This is perfect for when you have 8.5 by 11 pages, but you would like to be able to put them in a 12 by 12 album and not have the page size stand out. Now, I do mix 8.5 by 11 in with 12 by 12 in certain albums, and that's a look that works really well, so it may be completely unnecessary. But I also understand that sometimes when you put the pages together to tell a specific story, you realize that maybe one or two are the wrong size, and because there's only a few that are that smaller size or a different size, it really throws off the storytelling because it captures your eye for a reason that isn't what you wanted it to do. So this is a way to just change the page size and make a little bit of an adjustment to make it fit the style that you like. And that's to take the 8.5 by 11. These will stay completely intact, but I'll put them onto 12 by 12. Now for me, one of the biggest changes in my style is that I went from using lots of solid cardstock backgrounds to pattern papers. So I needed to have pattern papers where I could have two, because two 8.5 by 11s is not going to fit on one 12 by 12, clearly. So I need two pattern paper backgrounds for that 12 by 12. So I pulled out a few different options from what I had. And I started with these same two colors, the turquoise and the gray, thinking that one of those would be a good option. So all of these were patterns that I had two sheets. And these are all from Amy Tangerine, Yes Please. And to be honest, the reason why I have two sheets of them is because I'll buy two sheets if I like both the A and the B side and I can see myself using the whole sheet of both patterns. And so all four of these have B sides that I really like. But it's okay, I can break that rule and use both of them on one side. That's all right. So three of them are turquoise and one of them is gray. And the gray, while I liked the idea of balancing with the gray, I'll show you straight away why this was not my best choice. And that's because these grays in no way match. And I had a look at a few other gray pattern papers in different collections, and I just couldn't find a gray that was a good match to this. And I also felt that when I put this gray onto another gray, I actually ended up with this really quite drab color scheme. And especially if you consider that pink strip at the bottom would be gone, that's the branding strip. There's just, even though this turquoise is quite a vivid color, it just really washes out the tone quality. There is a gray tinge to the images already, so that doesn't help. So I decided straight away that gray would not be my best bet. I'll save those for another time. If you're interested in that one, the B side is this green with frames. Then that left me with the three turquoise options, and one is a little bit more green. The other two are more toward the blue side. And then it's just a case of putting them both side by side, laying this layout on top, and seeing what I liked best about each one. With this one, I really like the color, and I think the tones are quite good, because even in this plaid, there's this look that has the faded version versus the concentrated version of the color, which is the same thing that you get in this particular chevron. But I do think that this pattern is quite busy and also very much 2012, 2013. It's a very now pattern. So there's a little bit in favor and a little bit against that one. have the green next. It's still a turquoise, but it's more toward the aqua green end of that. And I actually don't mind that it's a different shade because I think it does then fade back into the background and really puts the attention on the two pages. I don't dislike this one, so I think that's actually a better candidate than this one. So I'll put this one aside. That one's out of the running. And then I have the 3 dot. Again, that pink is the branding strip, so that will be gone. And there we go. So this is the same tone quality as that first example. And the reason I like this one is because the 3 dots, it's a pattern that was popular at the time these pages were made, and now it's coming back, and it's coming back in a little bit of a different style. So it used to be neat and clean, now it's distressed. They used to be really orderly groups of 3 dots, and now they're a little bit more haphazard. But I like that that way that it is kind of, it's a modern pattern and it's a brand new piece of paper, but there is that pattern link to something that was very trendy at the same time. And so in my mind, the designs work really well together, while the chevron is something that is really hot right now. So I think, although I think either of them would work really well, I'm going to go with the 3 dot. By the way, the back of this one is a yellow version of the same 3 dot pattern. So that gives me my background, and one thing I do want to do straight away is to add something that will divide or border the 8.5 by 11 pages from the 12 by 12. So I'm just going to mat them on some white cardstock so that there won't be any space in the middle here, but there'll be a white frame all the way around the edge. So here's my 8.5 by 11 double page layout converted to 12 by 12. And now I can either leave that plain if I'm really happy with what's on the page, or if I want to make it match the style of the things in my album, then I can change it up a little bit by adding things around the edge, and that way the layout in the middle will still stay intact. So a few things I'm going to rectify straight away. One is that this layout has some fading, and that's right up here at the top. So I'm just going to use some washi tape to cover the fading. And I'll move that in a little bit more. Just using a gray chevron. And I know I eliminated the chevron pattern paper, saying that pattern was particularly trendy right now. And it was only because I was looking for something to choose one over the other. So don't hold me to that too much. In fact, just recently, I was at a museum and looking at really old engravings and carvings on some old Roman pillars, and around what would have been windows but without glass, and they had a zigzag pattern. And when I was reading the museum card, it actually called it a chevron and said that chevron carving was very popular in the time of the Romans taking over England. So there you go. Apparently chevron has been around forever and ever. It's just a pattern that keeps coming back. There we go. So just added one bit to cover the fading and then another bit to balance in the other corner. And this then gives me 2 places to start adding some different details. Now I have the small cards from the Amy Tangerine papers that I cut out last time for the adventure. So I chose 3 of these. One thing that in addition to using pattern, another thing that has changed in my style is using more color. I didn't have a lot of confidence with mixing color at this point in time, and so I had a lot of pages that would have one key color and then everything else in neutral, whereas now my pages tend to have lots and lots of color. So I decided I would bring in a 3rd color to this gray and turquoise, and I wanted that to be yellow, which worked out really well because the Amy Tangerine papers have this little dog motif that it doesn't repeat enough that you would think it is in some way, that the paper is in some way dog themed. Not at all. It's not a pet themed collection, but this one little dog appears, and normally that's not something I would use, but with these particular photos from a lifetime ago, it just seemed to be really perfect. So I'm going to include that one. And then the other thing was that I often use the expression true story when I'm telling like things that happened long ago and seem a lifetime ago, or they seem like something that almost happened to a different person because they're so different from my life now. And one of those is about growing up in the world of showing dogs. So if I tell somebody that, it is really common for me in conversation to then say true story, as if I know I could not even make this stuff up. So that's a perfect card. And then I just chose another one to bring in a little bit more of that yellow and mix it up. So I'm going to be doing that embellishment here and here. And I have a few other little things, some Ellie's Studio journaling cards and little dots that might come in handy, and these stamps from the new American Crafts collection. And I quite liked this noteworthy stamp, so I'm going to give that a try. Because I want to really focus on showing you how to redo a layout that you're really unhappy with, I'm not going to show you all of this embellishment step by step, but I'll make sure that I include close-up photographs for you. There's nothing here that's difficult. It's just going to be a few different pieces layered together. So here's that adjusted page adapted to 12 by 12, all finished, and it gave me the chance to be able to fill in the journaling that gives this a little bit more perspective, makes it make sense in my albums as you're reading through. And also it gave me a spot to add in the date, which I had missed entirely on this layout because it was before the point where I started realizing that things like that were important. Now, I also wasn't quite sure when this happened. I had a rough idea, but just from memory, I wasn't 100% sure. But from the little bit of journaling that I did have, I was able to look online, find the particular date for the event based on the elements that I had included, and now I was at least able to get it to a season. I think I even know the specific day, but in the end I just decided that saying that it happened in spring 1994 would be close enough. So that's my finished page, and I did take the embellishment a little bit over onto the edges to connect that, and I didn't add anything in between, but I hope that this gives you the idea of what you could do. You could keep it all to the sides. You could even not add any embellishment, just mat it on pattern paper and be done. Or you could bring more things into the layout and add little embellishments around the edges if that's what would suit your style. You could change the title around. You could add in more little elements if you wanted. You could add in your washi tape amongst the page, for example. But you really can do it quite minimally by just adding a little bit around the edges, and then it will fit into your 12 by 12. And if you're making other pages that are going to go next to this in your album, then there won't be a really dramatic shift from one style to the other. But let's have a look at that more interesting layout and see where I could go with that. Because in this case, I'm really going to start from scratch and do an entirely new page. So the first thing is, unless I'm going to reprint this, then the photos need to come off the layout. Now, it's up to you. If you want to keep the original and then just have the chance to scrapbook these photos again, you can keep the page intact, put the whole thing on a scanner or photograph the whole thing with a high resolution camera, and then reprint that and cut the photos out again to start again. In this case, there's nothing here that I'm particularly, I'm not going to miss it. And like I said, I have hundreds of pages from this stage in my evolution as a crafter, so there's certainly not going to be any great loss by me taking apart this really simple page. So I'm going to go ahead and take the photos off this page and use them as they are. So it will depend on what adhesive you used at the time and all sorts of things like that as to whether these photos are going to come off easily or whether they're going to be stuck quite fast. And these are stuck pretty well. I think at this point I was using a glue stick. This one is coming loose, so I may be able to tell from the back. I think this was before I discovered things like adhesive rollers. Let's have a look. If it's stuck fast, don't force it. I have a few tricks for you. I'm going to need to use them on that circular photo, it looks like. But it wasn't even a glue stick, it was a glue pen because the line of the glue is really narrow. And with a photo like this, I'm just going to take this off. Now, this is scrapbooking paper. It was it's not particularly my favorite pattern in the world, but it is archival. There's not a problem there, like I'm taking it out of something that's destroying the photo or anything. And you can see that that's kept good white quality. That's not yellowed at all. So that photo will be fine as it is. Then, if you have photos that are really stuck, take the page and put it face down, and then depending on how hot your heat source is, either leave it plain or take a light, like a tea towel or something light that you can put over the top. Then use a hair dryer, or if you have a really not too hot heat embossing gun, you can use that. You don't want the page to get hot, you just want it to get a little bit warm so that that glue will loosen. Now, I can't use my heat gun because my heat gun is the super industrial kind that you can use in plumbing and all sorts of madness like that. So that would definitely just scorch my page before it would actually loosen the glue. So I'll use my hair dryer. I'll just put the page down and I'll put a tea towel over the top and make sure that this part of the page gets just a little bit warm, and that will loosen the glue and I'll be able to take this off. It also helps to just slide a knife underneath or something that's a straight edge, like those fake credit cards or a gift card, the things that really you would just put in the rubbish. And something that has a nice straight edge that can just help you pry it so that you're not actually pulling it like you do with your fingers, because that's going to give you a lot of curl. And one last note, if you have photos that you've cut into different shapes. Now, I'm really lucky that the circles and a few ovals is pretty much as bad as I got. I had maybe 2 or 3 layouts that I went a little crazy with the cutting out of the shapes, but they aren't really things that were important to me to scrapbook, so I'm not particularly worried about going back and reworking those. But the best advice I can give you if you don't have access to be able to print it again from the negative is to take your camera or a scanner and take a picture of the photo as best you can and then go back in and crop it. So, for example, if I was really anti this circle, I could come back in and crop this into a rectangular headshot. It would be quite small, but it would be possible. Now, in this case, I'm going to see if in the final layout I can make the circle work. You'll know that that's not a look that I do on my pages very often, but I think I can get it into the design in a way that will be okay. But in case you have anything that's a really bizarre shape, that's usually your best bet. And if it's really cut out and not working very well, perhaps take it against a more neutral background, and it might mean that you'll actually cut out a whole piece that has some background to it already. But that might just be a little bit of compromise. With the photos removed from that lovely background, I'm ready to go, and I'm using a background paper from Bella Boulevard. This is a new collection where they have this same pattern in several different colors. So this is a chevron that's quite bold on one side, and then a crosshatch on the other. And that's a lot more delicate print. Now, because these photos don't have a lot of color and certainly have a cast to the white balance of the photo, I decided I would choose my university colors as the accent colors for the layout. So the university where I went had the colors red and gold, so I'm going to use red and yellow papers throughout the layout. And I've cut 2 border pieces from the side of Ellie's Studio 12 by 12 papers. These are from the Day-to-Day collection, and this one fits together like that, and I've just taken this part. There's a grid on the back side of that one. And the other has this cream with all sorts of different colors in little X's on one side, but also has this lovely detail with a file tab at the top, which I've just cut round. I'm going to layer these 2 pieces at the side and then place my photos in the opposite corner. So that brings in my red and yellow color scheme. And I went ahead and, well, the first thing I had to do once I had removed those photos was to straighten them up a bit. I actually didn't own a paper trimmer until I had been scrapping for about 5 years. So everything in my first 5 years of scrapbooking is a little bit wonky because I cut it all by eye with my scissors. So that meant I had really straggly edges, and I haven't been able to make them perfect without losing a lot of the picture, but I've brought them in as straight as I could get without cropping in too much. So I've straightened these out, and I matted them just on the A and the B side of the two prints, and ink everything to match just like I already did with the border pieces. And then I'm going to start looking at how I can make that circle photo work. So I have the busier photo there and the plainer photo here, but that would work quite well here. I think because these pictures are a little wonky and imperfect anyway, I'm still best to keep them on a little bit of an angle, but not the extreme angles that I had on the original layout. So let's see if I can do this a little bit more consistently with the style that I use now. And just in placing this here, I've automatically realized I'd really like to have some red, especially in a polka dot if I have any, in this corner behind here. So I'm just going to pause and see if I happen to have any red polka dot. Okay, well, I didn't have a polka dot, but I had a red and white small chevron. That's from the Simple Stories 6x6 in their Snap color collection. And it has a little red polka dot, but I've already used it, so I'm just moving on to another pattern. And that brings that color over there. Added the two more rectangular photos, but this did automatically make me want to bring in some yellow on this side of the page so that I'm repeating those colors together. So this is a yellow chevron washi tape, and I'm just going to use it in the dead space of the photo here. But if you don't like washi tape on your photos, it could also go on the vertical there and just stay attached to the paper rather than adhering on the photo. Definitely a personal choice, and you don't, while we're talking about page makeovers, you don't want to do something that you'll feel you have to make over again in the future. So with that washi tape there, I might bring it up here to the corner as well, and I'll just put it up here at the top edge. See how it works over this black. Yep, you can still see that it's yellow. So I'll do two little strips there as well. Then I'll come back with with a bit more embellishment over the top of that, but that gives me a little bit of yellow in the design. And now it's time to tackle that circle. So what I'm thinking is that it would be best to mat this and to use some nested circle dies to do that. And just like these were cut by hand, this circle was cut by hand too, and it is not circular. So I'm going to see if I have one nested die that would work for the photo, just to get it just a little bit tidied up without really dramatically changing the size, and then use the next one in the set of dies to do the mat behind it. Using nested circle and pinking circle dies, I was able to find a plain circle that would fit the photo and trim that back into shape, and then use a nested pinked circle to trim the border to go around the edge. Now I know that people get really upset when I use this particular set because unfortunately, although it used to be here in the two-piece store, Spellbinders at the moment are not making the pinked circle set. But I know the last time I used it, some people requested that they add it back into the lineup, and they have said that they would take that into consideration. So I do include that there in case you already have that tool in your stash. There's certainly good times like that to use it. I think in this case it will help my my circle be perhaps not quite so jarring, even though I don't tend to include many photos that are trimmed into circles. So by the time the page is done, I hope that it will match the rest of the look. So this gives me a place for my title up here, and it gives me plenty of room for journaling either across the page or in this column. And then I want a little bit of embellishment to bring it all together. And for that, I have a little sneak peek at something that will be arriving very, very soon. And that's Simple Stories 24/7 collection. And it's very much like the collections that they've had recently that are more everyday themed, and there are lots of different pieces that are great for cutting apart and putting in divided page protectors or using on 12 by 12 pages, just like the brightly colored Snap collection that they brought out earlier. But these colors are more subdued, so they really made me feel like they would be better for a layout that's a little bit retro, that's a little bit before digital photography and before all of those things. So good for scrapping older memories or current memories if you just prefer a more muted color palette rather than the bright, cool tones of hot pink and turquoise. So I'm going to cut out a few of these little Polaroid pieces and use them as embellishments throughout the page. Now, this design will come in a 12 by 12, which is larger, but I've taken it from the 6 by 6 paper pad, so I have smaller pieces to cut out. This makeover, I really tried to focus on the different things that I'm using now in my pages so that I could make the most dramatic change from that original style to something that's quite current with what I use now. So I added 2 different styles of thickers, and these are somewhat older thickers. This one's from Shoreline, and then this one is a much older alphabet, and I just had a few bits and pieces left. And then I realized that I've been using lots of enamel dots and of course gems even before that, but this alphabet had lots and lots of punctuation left. I had all these different little red glittery dots, so it seemed silly to not use them in just the same fashion as enamel dots, so I took 3 of them for each area of embellishment. And then added my journaling in the spaces in the gaps around the photos and in this column to fill the center, and those little Polaroids dotted about in 3 different places. I think this letter in the thickers is going to need a little bit more adhesive with some dimensional adhesive behind here because I wanted to overlap the letters. So I'll make sure before I put that in my album that L is nice and safe and secure. And then I added a little bit of Mr. Huey around the areas that have a little bit more space next to the items, so that they would be really current with the type of things that I have in my albums right now. So it's just a case of, if you want to give your pages a makeover, deciding which pages you think you would tell a better story or that would really complement the way you're storytelling in your albums now. Don't feel that you have to go back and change things just because your style has changed over the years. I certainly have plenty of pages that I'm happy for you to come in and look at my albums in my house. Well, please don't just walk in off the street. But if you're a guest in my house, I would love for you to just look at my albums. And I don't have any shame in showing you the older pages because there is certainly an evolution of style. But there are some times when I look back at an old page, and this one was a good example, where there's really a lot more to the story than what I told on the page. So I've done a little bit more of that here, and in fact, I think now that I've been working on this page, different types of stories about living in the dorms have come back to my mind, and it might be a great place for me to add a 6 by 12 page in my album that will just be storytelling, and I could use a few little bits of matching paper to make it coordinate. So that's 2 examples for you today, and your challenge is you can take it in 2 ways. If you have an old page that's been bothering you and you really want to give it a makeover, then please go ahead and do that and share it with us and show us the before and after and tell us a little bit about how you got there. But if you're not someone who wants to make over a page, please don't feel pressured to do so. You can still join in our challenge by using something that's just a little bit out of your ordinary, or using an older element of stash. So maybe a photo that's hard to scrapbook or some older supplies, and bring them up to date with the things that are new and your personal favorites at the moment, and share that layout with us too. I'd love to see your pages in the gallery, and I thank you so much for watching.
Join us next week for the continuing adventures of Glitter Girl and the ongoing mystery of the scrapbooker behind the mask at twopiesinAbucket.com.